The nuclear family, a cheerful stay-at-home mother and a hard-working father with their rosy-cheeked children. It was a term created after World War II, ushering in a new national sensibility. A perfect family, a perfect marriage, and a perfect home were the new standard. They revered piety, innocence, wealth, and chastity to be the shiny new American dream. But in 1948, that perfect image was tarnished. Alfred Kinsey, a sex researcher and former zoologist, published his first book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. It presented his team's research on homosexuality and habits, a topic many thought inappropriate for scientific examination, much less discussion.
I discovered that there was practically nothing known about human sexual behavior in comparison with what we knew about the sexual behavior of other animals.
Kinsey claimed that extramarital affairs, homosexual tendencies, and other undiscussed sexual behaviors were more common in American men than society portrayed. These controversial findings shocked and outraged the public.
Americans wanted Kinsey to have a moral perspective, to give and spout American values. He didn't do that. He simply collected data.
The release of the 1948 and 1953 Kinsey reports, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male and Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, outed the covert sexuality of American society and transformed how Americans view gender and sex. While Alfred Kinsey and his team broke through stereotypes, taboos, and barriers regarding sexuality in America, their flawed research and methodology brought up ethical and moral quandaries in the scientific community and America at large. Before he gained international fame and notoriety, Kinsey was an assistant zoology professor at Indiana University researching the sexual habits of gall wasps. He published his first two studies, which were both well received in the scientific community. Although Kinsey's scientific career was flourishing, he agreed to teach a class on marriage at the request of students. According to the Kinsey Institute, during this time, Kinsey's study into the subject of sex increased, and he began collecting sex histories to strengthen his research. After 3 years of preliminary research, Kinsey and his research staff had collected over 2,000 individuals' sexual histories. Through private conferences with his students and interviews with willing participants from nearby cities. To aid his work, he was given a total of $40,000 in grant money by the National Research Council's Committee for Research on the Problems of Sex, which allowed him to found the Indiana University Institute for Sex Research. With this grant, he and his team could continue their data collection and interviews, which consisted of Kinsey asking the interview participants, mostly male, about homosexual tendencies, affairs, fetishes, loss of virginity before marriage, and other experiences. While recording their answers, he promised anonymity and was said to make the interviewed individuals feel safe and comfortable. He and his team analyzed their information based on the Kinsey scale, a model that defined one's sexuality based on a scale from 0 to 6, 0 being exclusively heterosexual and 6 being exclusively homosexual, with 1 through 5 being intermediates between the two. Kinsey also included X, which designated the group of individuals who identified with no sociosexual contacts or reactions, or asexuality in today's term. From the data collected over the course of 7 years, Kinsey and his staff at the Institute for Sex Research published their first book on sexology, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, which included the Kinsey scale and data on American men. The report claimed, among other things, that it is probably safe to suggest that about half of all married males have intercourse with women other than their wives at some point while they are married. Particularly controversial was the 10% theory, the idea that 10% of Americans were homosexual, which was later proved to be untrue. In 1953, Dr. Kinsey and his team published a complementary work, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female. It was a struggle to publish, as many of those who pushed back against the first volume did not want a female version. This book focused more on frequency of women's sexual activity and how it was affected by age, socioeconomic position, and religious beliefs, in contrast to the explicit sexual habits chronicled in Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. These two volumes became known in the media and popular culture as the Kinsey Reports. The book became wildly popular, topping the New York Times book review charts and selling hundreds of thousands of copies. This popularity was mainly due to curiosity about the risque nature of the reports and their controversial results. For some, the reports held a mirror up to society to show its true nature, and for others, they were a direct, brutal contradiction of deep-set beliefs. Although Kinsey presented his results with statistics and evidence, the public found them to be vulgar, shocking, almost unbelievable. His conclusions clashed with how many Americans saw themselves: pure, chaste, and moral. According to Life magazine, there were varying reactions to the report, from viewing them as a milestone of science, to an assault on the family as the basic unit of society, to a negation of moral law. Most academics saw that the reports were a troubling departure from the scientific method, namely his methods and conclusions due to inadequate sampling techniques. Not only were there moral qualms with the reports, many scholars accused Dr. Kinsey of flaws in methodology, such as self-selection bias. Kinsey often chose individuals who were known to be homosexuals or pedophilic, rather than having his team randomly selecting participants. Kinsey often knew the participants and their sexual deviances, and as a result asked them to participate. According to statisticians Gebhardt and Johnson, about 1/3 of the sample was recruited because of a particular sexual interest. This naturally skewed the data and changed the results, raising concerns that Kinsey's conclusions did not reflect the general population. Because of the skewed demographics, the results and statistics were skewed as well. The large number of specifically chosen individuals with specific sexual interests caused Kinsey's conclusions to mirror his desired outcome, that America was highly sexual, with high percentages of homosexual men and those with fetishes and certain sexual preferences. Some scholars argue that Dr. Kinsey interviewed prison inmates and known pedophiles in his research to achieve the results he wanted. He wanted to sexually liberate America, to expose the commonality of homosexuality and socially frowned upon sexual interest. Viewed in retrospect, it seems that Kinsey and his team did indeed create a volunteer bias by recruiting certain people and allowing individuals to volunteer for the studies. Volunteer bias is the idea that those who volunteer for studies are often not representative of the overall populace. The typical scientific protocol is to obtain results that will reflect the general population. Kinsey's volunteers were often interested in discussing taboo topics and had experience with the sexual behaviors and interests that Kinsey's team asked about. Due to the social beliefs and practices of American society, many Americans were afraid or uncertain concerning the discussion of their sexualities and sexual habits. As a result, the American everyman that Kinsey so wanted to free from judgment and scrutiny regarding sex and sexuality was scarcely involved in the studies. Kinsey's research was also ethically problematic. Interviewers were told about child molestation, sex with relatives, and bestiality, among other topics. When this was discovered, Kinsey was criticized for not reporting the individuals to authorities. In response, the doctor asserted that he had to maintain confidentiality with his participants, that he would rather have honest answers to important questions than report certain individuals. These are without doubt flaws in the methodology of sexual behavior in the human male and sexual behavior in the human female. Due to these flaws, unfortunately, Americans often ignored the positive aspects of the two volumes. For example, the fact that women were a focus of the research was considered a huge step forward. According to Gloria Steinman, one of the premier social activists and feminists of the 20th century, as we still see in health trials and official research, women and even female rats are frequently excluded. Sexual behavior in the human-female was far from perfect, but it was a big step forward. Despite the methodological flaws, the report made readers aware of the existence of women's sexuality as something separate from pleasing men. The report highlighted that society repressed female sexuality and its discussion, which was something not known at the time. The research that Dr. Kinsey and his team conducted opened the doors for sex research and sexology, promoting the study of human sexuality. His work was embraced by the second-wave feminist movement and propelled the gay rights movement. They exposed the normality of sex, varied sexualities, and the presence of gender disparities in America, consequences that are often ignored when discussing the Kinsey reports. In the 1950s, the American dream was a two-story house in the suburbs. Times have definitely changed. This is in large part due to social justice, scientific action, and the work of pioneering people like Alfred Kinsey. While the Kinsey reports were far from perfect and in many aspects ethically problematic, they undoubtedly broke barriers in how our society views sex, sexuality, and gender, and they helped pave the way for a better future.